lot of individual choices that I've made sort of reflect the way society is run, and the more I think about it, the more I question why I've done them. For example, I don't go out at night because I don't feel safe at night. I wear baggy clothes because I hit puberty early. Just common things like this. When a girl wears baggy clothes, then she is hiding herself. When a girl wears shorter clothes, then she is asking for it. It's a lot of things like this, simple decisions that we make that reflect the problems that lie within our society that should not be there. And I think that it's important to recognize that everyone should be allowed to do whatever they want to do, and it is society that needs to change, not an individual.
This month, I think one of the things that students at Cupertino High School can focus on are microaggressive behaviors within classroom settings, specifically in group projects with mixed gender groups. A lot of the times, while the male students are encouraged to share their ideas and to really get into the meat of the work itself, a lot of the non-male students are often not heard and told to do the more creative parts of things, like working on the slides or the posters or things that are seen as lesser than. So I think one of the things we can really do to help build this community around the non-male students at this school is to encourage them to share their ideas within academic settings and feel like as if they have something to contribute to the classroom.
I've been kind of like working with like fashion and stuff and exploring that as an expression of my own identity and of my own personality. And so finding clothes that really fit you, I mean, it is like a whole thing about like confidence and stuff, and it really is like dressing for myself or dressing for yourself. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that, and I actually saw this thing online that really spoke to me, which was like, my outfit is not an invitation. And I think that's really powerful in the way that like, I'm not dressing for anyone else to see me, it's more of like something for myself. And so when people kind of take clothing as a way to, I guess, be like, they kind of think of it as an invitation for other people, like, oh, she was dressed a certain way, so she was kind of asking for it. And I hear that a lot, and I think it's a really disappointing viewpoint to hear, because truly when we dress to look a certain way, like even if I'm wearing sweatpants or a sweatshirt or something like a little bit more showy, it's not for someone else to kind of like see that and try and act on that. Because for me, that's not an invitation. That's just me wanting to be confident in my own body. It's not an invitation for someone else to try and explore my body that way.
So I definitely think that one thing is how toxic masculinity and basically societal and gender norms really discourage you from being able to open up about your mental health. And especially since sexual harassment and sexual assault can be experienced by people of all genders, it's really a universal thing. I also think that's why it's so important that we raise awareness about this issue. But secondly, and most importantly, toxic masculinity and the expectations that surround you and your gender identity really kind of prevent you and discourage you from treating other human beings with basic decency and basic kindness. And I think that at the end of the day, above being able to look cool or fitting into this norm or being accepted by a certain group of people, I think it's more important that we treat other people with respect and how we ultimately want to be treated.
So like in classroom settings, I feel like whenever I do speak, I always felt like people were talking over me, and whatever I had to say was not important, and it just sounded dumb coming from my mouth because, like whenever I started speaking, nobody would listen or people would cut over me and speak over me. Because of that, I feel like that made me a lot more reserved in classroom settings, just like talking in general, when I love to share my thoughts and I love to share my opinions, but just nothing that I said felt important. I also feel like when I do speak out about it, or I do kind of let them know that like I want to be heard, I've always been called names like aggressive or emotional, or that I'm overreacting, and that's not always like a response that makes me feel important or makes me feel respected.
Based on personal experiences, it's like if I dress more stereotypically feminine, it's like I would feel comfortable doing that, right? Like it's something that I feel comfortable doing in my body, and it's just a way to like express myself, but it's also then like I would have to weigh that with my safety. And it's like if I do dress in that like stereotypically feminine way, I have to take into consideration a lot more viewpoints. It's like, will I be harassed? Will I be catcalled? Will I be followed? Things like that, which unfortunately do happen to people who present differently than their expected gender norm or gender role. And I think that it's unfortunate that we do have to compare or like weigh like our safety versus our comfortability. And it's like I inevitably end up picking safety in places that I'm unsure. And I think that hopefully in the future we can work towards helping everyone prioritize comfortability over like comfortability in a safe environment instead of having to compare these two things.
One of the biggest problems within the Latinx community right now is machismo, which is basically just misogyny, which has its incredible downsides, including the current situation in Latin America with feminicide, which is the killing of women. This is very similar to the United States in the forms of, rape, assault, sexual battery, and the women in our communities have to face this every single day. Not being able to feel safe in their communities, having to fear men, and having to live in a society where they are not valued for certain things that make them who they are, whereas women in other communities have to fight to be recognized for different things. In different countries it'll vary. So for example, I think in America, some communities of, for example, white women will have more protections rather than women of color, especially Asian Americans or Latina women, Black women. And this also comes into the topic of intersectionality. So depending on whether you are a woman of color, if you are a part of a certain religion, if you practice certain beliefs, or if you are trans even, this can affect you in different ways.
Especially in teen clubs, I'm not going to specifically name the one that I'm referring to. Your team plays a huge impact on your experience, and so you are kind of in the position where even letting someone know about the experience in your team can affect your relationship with those members later on as you're going in and doing more activities in those clubs. And I think we need to be a little bit more transparent going forward about this, because I think I'm not sure what the situation is now, but what I went through was I couldn't really speak up about what I was going through. I was never allowed to do any of the hard stuff. What I got dealt with was the presentations, the slideshows, the posters. I joined the club to do something a little bit more related towards coding, but what I really ended up receiving was just creating slide decks, finding slide deck templates, etc. So I think it would be really nice if we could kind of rework that. And I know the initiative has been started to kind of ask girls to come forward to talk about this, but I think moving forward to a system where it's a little bit easier and girls are having less stress to open up about their experiences.
I think that when we talk about misogyny, we often paint it as a woman's problem, but in reality, it's a problem that men play a very big part in. And I think that in order to get anywhere, to make any progress, men need to start becoming allies to women in the same way that, like, when it comes to racism, it's not enough to just not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. It's the same thing with misogyny. It's not enough for a man to just not be misogynistic, but they need to be actively calling out other men and creating a safe space for women. And I think that that's something that gets looked over a lot because, like I said, people tend to make misogyny a women's problem when really it is everyone's problem, and it's everyone's job to keep progressing it.
After coming back to school, I started wearing more revealing clothing. I got really comfortable wearing crop tops and low-cut shirts and tank tops. I really liked wearing those clothes, but then I started noticing that a lot more people were looking at my body in a different way. A lot of people were looking at my chest if I was wearing a lower cut shirt. People were looking at my stomach, and it made me really think about how, like, it's never really gone away, how women's bodies are so stigmatized even now.
Womanhood is one of the most beautiful yet terrifying experiences I've ever had. The rite of passage for a misogyny-affected person has never been clear. Is it getting your first period or fearing your life while walking in the dark? Or maybe it's getting called a whore for your low-cut shirt, or being called aggressive for sharing an opinion, or getting accused of leading a guy on simply because you weren't interested. Maybe this is why we learn to be ashamed of our femininity, why we take up less space and don't speak out. We're conditioned to be fearful of womanhood. There's not a single correct choice that can be made.
Toxic masculinity, it's kind of just like the controlling and gaslighting of young male kids to like think and act certain ways. And this like sort of, I guess, gaslighting really puts a more of a divide between, I guess, males and females, and I guess this sort of divide kind of enables men to like act a certain way to women, and it's like not stopped in society because then this sort of mentality is kind of accepted because of the toxic masculinity, and this sort of behavior starts to progress into more, I guess, violent and very disgusting acts as well.
In group projects, a lot of the time if you don't understand just like one thing, you ask a question, they start explaining like the entire chapter and kind of treat you like you're an idiot, and I feel like that's just makes you feel like really small and like very much like it's hard to like determine whether or not you know things, and you kind of second guess yourself.
Are you a feminist? That's a question I get asked often, and it's a difficult one to answer because of what society has deemed as feminism. When I get asked these during regular conversations, people laugh because we have made this definition of feminism equal to, you know, the fact that women are superior to men. Oftentimes this is not what feminism means. Feminism is understanding that over history, females have had a difficult time in equalities. There's a battle that we have fought long and hard for to be considered equal to other genders. And when people laugh when we mention feminism, it only goes to show that society is still very timid about the fact that women don't have the same experience as men, that women have to fight for many of their rights, that solidarity with each other is a battle that still needs to be done because it's so taboo within our society. When we hear feminism, we laugh. I think as a society, there are conversations to be had regarding the regular experiences and choices that women make. That we teach young girls that you have to wait for a prince, not to be heroes themselves. We watch Disney movies without consent, and then we start to wonder, hey, maybe this is what happens in real life. Conversations need to be normalized. Feminism needs not to be taboo. Society has to make strides in those directions, but they're yet to be made. And that's why we're having conversations like these now.
We wanted to create this video to shed light on some things that may be more easily brushed off or normalized within our communities, because really like normalizing more of these small things really easily like leads to larger problems within our communities. And I think it's really important for all of us to recognize that none of us are exempt from this, and that all of us need to reflect on our own actions and words and maybe think about how we've contributed to this problem. And I think it's really important that we shift the burden away from teaching people how to maybe protect themselves and stay safe, and instead work on educating people on how not to be a part of the problem.